That's my baby girl right there. Ooh, she with her friends. I'm a dog, I ain't shit. I'ma wind up hitting her friends. Bad guy, outlaw. Ooh, I'm like Pac, but I ain't die after the second time I got shot.
What's good? This is your boy Internal Sadist, aka Tico Trin. This podcast is going to be about womenist versus feminist. So this is going to be a nice little breakdown in the differences between them. That's pretty much what this is going to be about. Because there's a huge difference between womenist and feminist. Sad part about that is we keep running around acting like they're all the same. We're just going to be making ourselves look dumber than a box of rocks, basically. Acoustics are fire. Thanks. So typically, if we keep running around acting like this ain't really a thing, we'll pretty much end up running into a big ass mess our damn selves. We're basically going to be no different than the left when they say all men are this, basically. Typically, what the differences between them comes down to how they carry themselves, their attitudes, their personalities, and their temperaments for all intents and purposes. Their styles and other lovely things like that. What's up, America Seville? How you doing today, pimpin'? And the sad part about that, when it comes down to the difference between womenist and feminist, is it comes down to like several key factors that actually differentiate the two from one another for all intents and purposes. Good example of that is when it comes down to it, dating and racism. Dating and racism. The sad part about that is feminists will talk shit on white men, but all they'll date is pretty much white men. That's pretty much how that works. Feminists will talk shit on white men, but they're less likely to date outside their race when it comes down to it. It's just facts. About like, I would say about 98 to 99% of feminists who dump on white men date nothing but white men. There, I said it. That's pretty much one of the many different things that differentiate between a womanist and a feminist. The sad part about that is a womanist is willing to actually date a black man, a white man, a Chinese man, an Asian man, any man, an Arab man, a this man, a that man, you name it, basically. A womanist is willing to date all the above. Whereas a feminist will talk shit on white men while dating a white man, while sitting in a hot tub next to a white man, complaining about how her life is wrong or how bad her life is, or shit like that for all intents and purposes, while she's sitting in a hot tub right next to a white man who pretty much gave her the lifestyle that she's pretty much living in. That's typically how this stuff works. So at the end of the day, the irony to it is, while feminists will sit there and literally dump on men, and we talk about like self-hate, at the end of the day, it's not really self-hate or reverse racism. It's basically just racism. They're racist against white people. And if you want to get technical, they're sexist against men. So they're racist against white people and they're sexist against men. It's typically the difference between a feminist and a womanist. A womanist would actually date outside her race. A womanist is more likely to be a bit more conservative, but they tend to be a little bit more open-minded about stuff like that, and they'll tend to like date a black guy, or they'll date an Asian guy, or they'll date a man from another race. They're statistically more likely to date a man from another race and not only just date white men. So that's one of the things that you typically run into when it comes to dating. Womenist exclusively date white men, and feminists exclusively date white men, whereas wominists will date they have a pretty open mind on who they can date. As long as they love them and they can be in a relationship with them, they're pretty much willing to date anybody that loves them and cherishes them for all intents and purposes, is what I'm basically saying. It's typically how that works. At the end of the day, when it comes to racism, feminists are more racist than wominists. Wominists are less racist than a feminist for various reasons. One, like I said, they have an open mind and are willing to date outside their race, and two, because it is what it is. Um, the sad part about feminists is they tend to be more racist for the fact that for two reasons. One, they're racist against their own race, and two, they're less likely to date any of those other races who they're claiming are obscure or needs their help. They're more likely to stick to a white man than they are to go to another race. They'll talk trash about being willing to date another. They'll talk trash about how oppressed another race is, but they're not willing to actually date that person from that race. They're more likely to stick to their own race, and that's the cold hard truth when it comes down to it. Wominists are more likely to date, not be less racist, and feminists are more likely to be racist. Moving right along, hairstyles. We've pretty much already seen these hairstyles. A womanist is not going to dye her hair a ridiculous color. A womanist is always going to keep her hair natural colors for all intents and purposes. So she's going to keep it the natural orders: black, blonde, brown, red. Not crazy red. I'm talking about redhead red. It's typically how that works. The sad part about that is feminists, on the other hand, they're more likely to do the crazy ass ridiculous colors: green, purple, pink, blue, burgundy, wherever the hell color, red, actual red, like red, like red like my timer in the corner of my damn stream. Y'all can't see that. Red like America's DeVille's logo, basically. They're willing to dye it red, yellow, pink, blue, purple, any color under the fucking sun. That's not a natural hair color. They're willing to do that. That's typically one of the other many differences between a womanist and a feminist. Basically, how it works is womanists are more likely to actually go with their natural colors. Let it be blonde or brown or black, you know, stuff like that. Typically, they typically tend to stay away from anything crazy. They might get like some frosted tips, or they might get like some highlights with red in it, but they're not willing to go 100% red. And typically, when they do that, it's typically near a holiday season is when they're actually pulling off that look. Is typically when that works or when that happens. Whereas with a feminist, that's pretty much all year round uniform for her for all intents and purposes. So what happens with that? What's up, Jaguar Media? What's up, MGTOW to win? So typically with that is what happens with that is you'll run into a lot of women who are feminists with crazy color hair or rainbow color hair or ridiculous color hair, basically. Let it be, and the most off the wall hair colors too, for all intents and purposes too, which is actually pretty funny within itself. It's typically how that also works. And the sad part about that is that's how you can actually distinguish the difference between a feminist and a womanist. Another good example of a difference between a feminist and a womanist is when it comes to hairstyles, the haircut. And what I mean by that is typically what you'll run into with a lot of these women is they'll have hair on the top, but the sides of their hair will be shaved. That's typically a feminist that you're dealing with. Because there's not too many women, there's not any wominists at all that are willing to rock that hairstyle and give up any ground in their femininity, basically, for all intents and purposes. Because wominists basically tend to keep their femininity and they tend to not really go too far off to not look like a female woman for all intents and purposes. They want to maintain their femininity or in their femininity look and glow for all intents and purposes. Whereas wominists are willing to do that and actually maintain their femininity and stuff like that. Whereas feminists, they just go off the deep end and they'll do shit like shave the sides of their hair and dye it, or get a mohawk and shave the sides of their hair and stupid shit like that for all intents and purposes. So typically that's the hairstyle that hairstyle is for feminists for all intents and purposes. Wominists aren't willing to actually go that far or do that. What's up, Shinobi One? And that's typically one of the that's one of the many things that people run into when you're dating a feminist is they'll run into women with shaved. They'll have like the hair on top and the shaved sides, basically. So that the sides of their hair will be gone, but they'll have all this hair up top, or it'll be a buzz cut on the side and all this hair up top. Typically, is how that works. And it's true and it's sad, but it is what it is. That's a part of their. That's a part of their hairstyle for all intents and purposes, and that's typically how you get into. That's typically what it is when it comes down to it. Um, Another good example of a difference between a feminist and a womanist is money. Money. The sad part about feminists is typically they want they want all the trappings of this new age woman while still maintaining the 50s housewife for all intents and purposes. So they want to be taken care of. They want a man that makes more than them still, and they want to be able to go off to school and be a career driven woman. Typically, how that works. It is what it is. It's sad, but it's true. Typically, a lot of feminist women basically want to be able to be strong and independent, but they want to date a man who makes more money than them, looks better than them, and all this other great stuff. When in fact, they're actually not putting in the work to actually do it for themselves. It is what it is. It's the nature of the beast, and it's true. The sad part about that, on the flip side, wominists are actually more likely to actually date a man who actually makes less money than them. True statement. Um, Wominists are more likely to date a man who actually makes less money than them. Wominists are also more likely to typically work part time or not work too many hours at all for all intents and purposes too. If they don't work, that is, or if they are going to work part time, they typically work part time, and they typically or they don't work at all. Whereas on the flip side to that, or the other end of the spectrum, they'll basically work and they ain't got no problem with making more money than their men. Most wominists have no problem with their men making less money. Most wominists are more likely to have a man at home that ain't doing shit with his life, but playing PlayStation and driving her car. That's pretty much how that works. So you'll run into a lot of women who has a car or has a car from her daddy, and he's driving it around. He's supposed to pick her up on time. He's picking her up late, shit like that. Or that nigga ain't doing shit with his life but playing PlayStation or playing Madden or playing Xbox basically all day. And somehow, some way, he's late to pick her up from her job. And it's fun. It's the funniest thing in the world when you see it. It really is the funniest thing in the world when you see it. Um, that's one of the many things when it comes down to it. And that's a womanist that's willing to actually do that. Um, yeah, they're more willing to actually take care of a stay-at-home, a man at home than a feminist is. A feminist wants to be taken care of while pretending like she can do everything herself. That's typically how that works. Um, Behavior or temperament is the next thing I'm going to touch on in this lovely stream. The difference between a feminist and a womanist when it comes to behavior and temperament is a womanist only speaks up when she's had enough. A feminist pretty much she speaks up anytime she opens her fucking mouth, basically. That's typically how that works. A womanist only speaks up or says something when enough is enough for all intents and purposes, and she believes that she's been done wrong or stuff like this. Like she doesn't typically always run her mouth. She doesn't typically always run off at the mouth claiming problems this, problem that, men this, men that. That's typically a feminist that runs off at the mouth and says stupid shit like that on a regular basis. That's pretty much a feminist in a nutshell. A womanist is more likely to complain either after, during, or in the middle of a breakup for all intents and purposes. What's up, no sweetheart? And this is pretty much how this stuff ends up working when it comes to womenist. Typically, when they complain post relationship or while they're going through shit in that relationship, or when they have a problem with actually meeting a guy and they run into frustrations. This is typically when they start opening their mouths and running their mouths and, you know, saying the shit that they want to say. That's typically the difference between a womanist and a feminist. A feminist will open her mouth anytime to complain about any damn thing and let anything fall out her mouth. Whereas a womanist only complains when she's going through a breakup or has post breakup, going through a pre breakup, post breakup, uh, while she's having a problem in a dating market, or she's reevaluating her choice in men for all intents and purposes. That doesn't always pan out where she reevaluates her choice in men. That's typically something that they learn later in life for all intents and purposes, because if she hasn't learned it already, she's pretty much going to let it float by for all intents and purposes. But, typically women is basically like to be taken care of too, for the most part, as well as they like to be taken care of too. But typically, a lot of them tend to work part time, if anything. But there is a small majority of them that like to actually be stay at home moms and stuff like that, and be taken care of by the man for all intents and purposes. However, there are some that work, but they also have no problem with dating a man who makes less than them. As far as like behavior and temperament, like I was saying, a womanist's temperament is pretty much based on a reaction or a an afterthought, either post breakup, pre breakup, while she's having trouble on the dating market. It basically comes from frustration, for all intents and purposes. That's pretty much her temperament. Everything she says comes from frustration. That's the best way I can describe it to you. Whereas everything a feminist says basically just is nonsense or just random shit that they are pretty. Think of it like this: a feminist basically would be like you throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. So anytime a feminist opens her mouth, think of it like you throwing random things at the wall until something sticks. That's pretty much what a womanist does. I mean, a feminist does for all intents and purposes. Whereas a womanist typically complains post relationship, pre relationship breakup, post relationship breakup. I mean, post relationship, pre relationship breakup, and they'll complain when they're frustrated or can't really find what they were looking for in the market at the time. That's typically the only times that a female will complain. And they will complain too because they're female. That's typically how it works. That's a female in a nutshell. The sad part about that is about knowing the differences between the two when you're actually dealing with one or the other for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that is that's typically how this works. The sad part about that is womenist womenist go off experience, whereas feminists go off of feelings. Don't get me wrong, wominists will go off of experience and feelings, but wominists mainly go off of experiences that they experience in their lives or shortcomings or stuff like that. Whereas a womanist will pretty much try to relive somebody else's bad time or try to relive somebody else's trauma or, you know, throw out false shit to basically make it sound true or put together something ridiculous just so they can make it seem as if it's something amazing. Typically how it works. So when you run into this, you'll typically that's how this stuff works, and that's typically how this stuff ends up panning itself out. And the sad part about that is if you know the differences, you'll pretty much know that there's a difference in the temperament and the attitude in a woman when it comes down to it. When it comes to style, when it comes to styles, when it comes to style, the style that the women wear, typically when it comes to style and how they carry themselves and What I mean by style, this portion of style is how they carry themselves, what they do, and how they do it. Good example of that is a feminist is less likely to take care of herself. It's just true. A feminist is less likely to take care of themselves. Feminists are more likely to to have hairy legs or hairy arms or hairy lip or hairy any fucking thing. Whereas a womanist is more likely to take the time and shave to actually show off her femininity. A feminist is less likely to show off femininity. They're more likely to shout and scream and and do stupid shit to get them as much attention and act like men for all intents and purposes is pretty much how it works. So the sad part about that is feminists are more likely to act like men and be out there acting a fool and and act stupid and do all this ridiculous, stupid shit, all to get their point across. It's pretty much how it works. All to get their point across, and act a fool and do stupid shit and stop stuff, start stuff, you know, make up stuff so they can make up stuff so they can be a victim. Uh, anything and everything in their anything and everything to basically make it sound like they're a victim and or they're being treated unfairly or you don't like them for a certain reason. Also, in the same token, feminists are more likely to be a bit on the heavy set side also because typically when you don't take care of if you're not willing to shave your legs or take care of your body, typically you tend to let yourself go with pretty much how that really ends up panning out. So you're more likely I'm gonna take a while. I guess you just meant to say better. Um, what's up, successful? Not really. Sometimes I did a live stream on my other one, a reaction live stream to Sweet Anita on my race and gender relations channel and my Black Pill Red Pill Radio channel. So this is my second stream of the night. So this is gonna be my last stream of the night, early morning too. But typically, how this works is feminists are more likely to let themselves go weight wise and size wise, and are also willing to let themselves go hair wise. So they lack the proper grooming. Something that I found funny about a lot of feminists is apparently they let other parts of their body go, but they typically will shave their pussy hair. Let that just sink in. Let that just sink in. um, um, that's typically one of the many things that you'll run into a problem with when dealing with the feminists basically. Feminists are more likely to take care of their bodies and their appearance and their upkeep, their looks and stuff like that, whereas feminists are less likely to upkeep their looks. They're basically out there saying accept me for me when feminists are basically out there trying to actually fit the part and look the part basically so they can be picked over, you know, love me for me or, you know, accept me for me. Feminists are more likely to actually present themselves in a much more pretty light. It'd be the difference between getting a gift wrapped in shit and getting a gift wrapped in, you know, gold foil with a pretty bow. It's typically how that works. What's up? No, not all the time, but I am going to go to sleep after this lovely stream is over. So yeah, I'm eventually going to go to sleep. So typically, that's one of the fundamental styling differences between wominists and feminists. Wominists are more likely to take care of themselves and their appearance and their upkeep, and they're more likely to, you know, spend more time on how they look and present themselves. They're also more likely to exercise, go to the gym, and do stuff like this too. Feminists are less likely to do this shit. They're more likely to look a little bit on a pleasantly plump side and are more likely to not shave their legs, not shave their armpits, not shave their arms, not shave any part of their body for all intents and purposes, except for one area for all intents and purposes. So typically, that is one of the many different things. What's up, Billy? Billy the Goat. That is one of the many different things. Matter of fact, why aren't you asleep now that I think about it? Successful endeavors. It is late for your ass. Why ain't your ass sleep? Questioning me like this. How you doing? I'm glad to see you're okay and you're actually able to join streams though, Pimpin. Kind of scared us with that for a little bit there, but I'm glad to see you're okay and able to make it to streams. But back to the lecture at hand. Um, typically with that, and when you run into these women and stuff like this, it's one of those things where you pretty much have to be able to, yeah, basically women fit the societal standards and or what a man actually wants in a woman. It's typically how that works. Is the best way I can describe it to you, you guys. They're willing to actually fit the societal norms and or fit the standards and or do stuff that is do stuff to themselves that's favorable for a man's affection and love for all intents and purposes. Where a feminist will pretty much say, accept me for me. Or do what they want to do, then wonder why they can't have the relationships they want or have the successful relationships that they really desire for all intents and purposes is the best way I can describe it to you. Walks in on shade pussy. Basically. But it's typically how that works. And that's pretty much how that works in a nutshell when you actually see it happening. What's up, Billy the Goat? And the sad part about that is we always sit up here and try to make it sound like, they're the same thing when in fact they actually are different. They're two sides, to the same coin at the most. The sad part about that, if you're going to get into a relationship, if you only had to pick between those two, you're going to get into a relationship, I would say neither, but if you really had to pick one, I would go with the womanist over the feminist. But the sad part about that, at the end of the day, I would avoid the womanist too. Because like I said, wominists are basically like Eastern European women is the best way I could describe it to you. I actually did a video on Eastern European women. Um, Typically, it's the same quote that the Russian women use. My money's my money, and your money's our money. That's typically how that works when it comes to womenist. My money's my money, and your money's our money. So yeah, that's pretty much how that works. Ah, where the hell? Yeah, that's typically the best way I can describe it to you and explain it to you in the best way. When it comes to womenist, my money's my money, your money's our money. Um, so you basically want to avoid that one too. Or if you only have two options, which very rarely you have two options, there's always a third or a fourth option. But typically men tend to pick ass and tits first, then they'll pick a feminist, then they'll pick a womanist, and then eventually they get to the other option for all intents and purposes. But yeah, basically, wominists have a better wrapping job, a better outward appearance on themselves, whereas feminists have the worst outward appearance on themselves when it comes to themselves. Gold-plated copper hose. You're simple as hell with that one, sweetheart. But typically, yeah, that's fundamentally the difference between a womanist and a feminist. And the sad part about that is, to me, they're both the same thing, but you're more likely to get a better relationship out of a womanist than you are to get out of a feminist. Or let me rephrase that. In all technicality, because I actually know men who actually date feminists who actually are in long lasting relationships, which I don't really understand. The sad part about that, these men tend to be more dominant, is the best way I could put it to you. They tend to be more domineering men. So typically what happens with feminists who get into relationships with men like this, they buck and complain about it but they eventually tone it down and actually follow suit. Is the best way I could put it to you. They might buck and complain about it in the beginning, but they typically settle down and follow suit at the end of the day. At the end of the day, when it comes to it, there are some that are more radical. The sad part about that is some of the best feminists are actually in casual, I mean, not conservative relationships. Like I was saying about at the beginning, when it comes to feminists, feminists always complain about the white man while still dating a white man. They'll complain about the white man being this, that, and the other, and dangerous and destructive, and he's the bad to society, and this, that, and the other, and he's the reason why society is, while still dating a guy, while sitting in a hot tub in a mansion some damn where right next to this guy, she'll dump on this guy. It's typically how that works. Whereas a womanist is more likely to date across racial lines than a feminist is. 98 to 99% of feminists actually only date white men. Even though they dump on white men, they only date white men. That's typically how this works. Whereas a womanist is more likely to date across racial lines and racial divides and cultural divides for all intents and purposes. Whereas a feminist is less likely to do it, but they're willing to actually open their mouths and talk about these issues that they're not willing to actually date somebody with these issues in the first damn place. It's sad. It's true. But it is what it is. And the sad part about that is the sad part about that is at the end of the day, you have to be able to learn the difference between the two, and you got to be able to deal with the two in their proper manners and a proper light. Because at the end of the day, once it's all boiled down to nothing, they both want to be pampered and treated like princesses. The sad part about that is that's the problem. They continuously act like a princess when they should be trying to act like a queen. This is typically why both of them get looked over or skipped over for this very reason, because they don't know how to grow up and be a queen. They're too busy running around trying to be a princess, a spoiled princess. This is typically why men overlook them. This is typically why they stay lonely and single, because they act like spoiled brat princesses. It's typically what it is. I gotta go check that out. But yeah, that's typically the difference between wominists and feminists. If you missed the beginning, I would urge you to go back and actually check it out because I talk about a lot of the other stuff. That's the difference between the two and stuff like that. I'm trying to think if there's something else that I skipped over or missed. I talked about the way they upkeep themselves and stuff like that. I talked about racism. Feminists are more likely to be racist against their own self and sexist against men than womenists are. Womenists are more likely to complain if something directly bothers them or if they're running into some frustration. Whereas feminists will complain about any fucking thing and every fucking thing under the fucking sun as long as it sticks to the wall. And they'll try to make it stick to the wall as much as possible too. If they really want something to stick, they'll try their best to make it stick and they'll keep on rambling on about it as much as humanly possible. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. That's actually a part of the competition thing that I talked about when it comes to women. Women are more likely to be women are more competitive with each other to actually get a man. It's typically how it works. I talked about this in another video where I said a woman, a woman that if multiple women want one man, one woman would actually try to sabotage other people's chances of getting with that man. Typically, what she'll do is she'll run off and she'll tell the woman that he cheated on his wife or he's a this, that, and the other. He's a no good this, that, and the other, and this, that, and the other for all intents purposes. And that'll typically turn a woman off and go, ooh, he's like that? Ooh, I don't want to be with somebody that's like that. And that pretty much lessens her competition into getting that man. Another thing that she'll do, I talked about, is she'll actually go to the man and badmouth another woman that really wants him. So she'll have less of a competition because women hate competing against each other for a man if they can actually eliminate their competition. If they can, they have no problem with destroying somebody and or lying on somebody to pretty much do it for all intents and purposes is typically how it works. And that's pretty much what I talked about in the one video about that whole entire thing. But this is a different video. This is Womenist versus Feminist. And typically that's going to be all women across the board no matter what. Both sides of the same coin basically pull those same tactics and deploy those same tactics anyway. I try, sweetheart. I try. I try to be, and thank you very much for actually responding and letting me know you're okay. Because I'd have probably had to show up at the hospital and figure out where you were just to come find you to see if you were okay. Because I was a bit worried about you, just a bit, just a little bit, enough to show up at the hospital if you didn't respond. But yeah, I try my best to be a good person, and I try my best to be a decent human being. It's typically how that works. Um, but I try my best to be an upstanding citizen, despite the fact that I will tell you in a heartbeat, I am a criminal, but I am an honest criminal, and I try my best to be an upstanding citizen of the law. America's you're in Discord. I'll just give you my number in Discord. Um, I'll email you, no sweetheart, or I'll send it to you in COD. but but typically that's how that works, and that's pretty much the differences between those two lovely. That's the difference between those two lovely women. Uh, Womenists are more likely to actually put in the effort to actually be feminine. Feminists are less likely to put in the effort to actually be feminine. It's typically how that works. Women basically women Women basically go about it differently than feminists. Feminists basically want to bash you over the head and basically think of it like this: Womenists want to woo you back to the cave, whereas feminists want to beat you over the head and drag you back to the cave. Typically, the best way I can describe that to you is the differences in the temperament between womenists and feminists. Womenists are more likely to woo you back to the cave, or serenade you, or you know, cook something to lead you back to the cave, or leave a trail of breadcrumbs to lead you back to the cave, basically. Whereas feminists are more likely to beat you over your head and drag you back to the cave, whether you like it or not. Um, that's typically how that works. Um, but yeah, now that I got through all the comments and stuff like that, yeah, cool. Okay, cool. Stay up. Yeah, but typically that's how that works, and that's the overall differences between womanists and feminists. Um, like I said, they're both sides to the same coin. At the end of the day, um, it's all about how you approach them. It's not there's not it has nothing to do with maintaining frame or being an alpha male. It's all about how you approach them, when you approach them, and how you went about it for all intents and purposes. What's up, a manly load? Yeah, both sides of the same coin with government, basically, what a manly load said. So it's typically one of those things, and you have to be able to actually discern the two and understand the two because they both have different temperaments, and they both have different ways on procuring what they want for all intents and purposes. One goes about it very, very, very brash and rudely. The other one goes about, very brash, rudely, and barbarically. And the other one goes about it very demure and, secretive and subdue or settle, basically, or conservatively, is the best way I can describe it. I'm trying to think. Anything else that can actually go with this? No, that's about it. Yeah, y'all have a blessed day. Be good to yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk. Do not but spoil yourselves. Always improve upon yourselves and make yourselves a better version of yourselves. Never stop improving upon yourself. Always be a better version of yourself. Always be willing to learn and keep an open mind. And always be willing to expound upon your knowledge and mind and skills for all intents and purposes. That goes for anybody across the board. Let it be man, woman, child, Apache helicopter, dog, T-Rex, transgender, whoever you want to be, whatever you are. Always improve upon yourself and make yourself the better version of yourself. Y'all be blessed and have a good night. And thank y'all for coming. And if y'all missed the beginning, go back and check it out where you missed out at, or wherever you missed out before you came into the stream. Be good to yourselves and be good. Adios. No, what I was saying basically, Billy the Goat, womenists act feminine, whereas feminists actually don't act feminine at all. They act like barbarians for all intents and purposes, or uncouth people. That's pretty much how it works. But yeah, pretty much, yeah. True story on that one. Good night, success. Going through all these comments basically before I let out. Sunday.